Welcome to When Gen X Ruled the Multiplex, in which I look at some films that shaped the worldview of those of us who are members of Generation X. 1986's SpaceCamp was directed by Harry Weiner, from a screenplay by Clifford Green and Casey T. Mitchell, from a story idea by Patrick Bailey and Larry B. Williams. A few weeks back when I looked at Teen Wolf, I mentioned that it was a mediocre film that became a big surprise hit due to a stroke of great timing, in that it profited from the release of Back to the Future and the newly minted stardom of Michael J. Fox. SpaceCamp is a mediocre film that nonetheless probably could have done pretty well at the box office, and yet it bombed due to the worst possible timing for its release. This is a lightweight and silly film about teens on the Space Shuttle that hit theaters in the US when our national grief over the Challenger disaster was still fresh. A NASA astronaut named Andy Bergstrom complains to her husband, fellow astronaut Zach, about being passed up for a chance to pilot the Space Shuttle. Instead, both Andy and Zach will spend the summer as instructors at SpaceCamp. Andy is played by Kate Capshaw, best known for starring in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which was directed by her future husband, Steven Spielberg. Zach is played by Tom Skerritt, whom we've already seen in Top Gun. US SpaceCamp is a real-life camp founded in 1982 for children and adults with a special interest in the space program. Past SpaceCamp attendees have included multiple future astronauts. The first SpaceCamp attendee we meet is rebellious Kevin, who pulls up in his Jeep while blasting Eric Clapton's Forever Man. He parks in Zach's parking spot and yells out a heckling remark to Andy about her breasts. This is his very first line of dialogue in the film, and I gotta say, it was a bold choice for the filmmakers to introduce this film's male romantic lead by showing him sexually harassing his teacher. Kevin is played by Tate Donovan in his first major film role. He'd go on to work steadily in film and television, and gained fame in the 90s for being the guy lucky enough to date both Sandra Bullock and Jennifer Aniston. Next to be introduced is a brainy perfectionist named Catherine, who arrives at camp while piloting a biplane. Kevin is instantly horny for Catherine and commits some blatant identity theft to finagle a spot on her team. Catherine is played by Lea Thompson, whom we've seen in Back to the Future, Howard the Duck, and Some Kind of Wonderful. We meet the rest of Catherine and Kevin's teammates, who include Rudy, who lacks confidence in his science knowledge and who is played by Revenge of the Nerds' Larry B. Scott, cute bubbly Tish, who is played by Kelly Preston, who died far too young of cancer last year, and a Star Wars-obsessed 12-year-old named Max, who is played by River Phoenix's baby brother Leaf Phoenix in his big screen debut. In 1986, if you had asked me to pick the SpaceCamp cast member who would go on to snag 4 Oscar nominations, I would have burned through an awful lot of guesses before landing on this hammy little kid. Leaf would soon evolve into a highly regarded performer, appearing in films under his birth name, Joaquin. He'd win an Oscar in 2020 for his starring role in Joker. Andy assigns roles to the team members. She names Rudy Mission Specialist, then puts Tish in charge of communications. Tish is extremely enthusiastic about space exploration, and while it seems like she might be an airhead, it turns out she has a photographic memory and a brain and a half on her. Within seconds of meeting Tish, Andy mocks her Valley Girl accent to her face, which is a total mean girl move. She doubles down on the mean girl moves when, upon learning that Catherine's dream in life is to become the first female shuttle commander, she hands the role of shuttle commander to Kevin, who is not interested in space in any way and is just there because his rich parents wanted him out of the house. A discouraged Catherine is handed the role of pilot. With their roles in place, the teens all mess around with the extremely cool NASA equipment. Max bonds with a talking robot named Jinx, who is voiced by legendary voice actor Frank Welker. We're treated to a pair of Dire Straits hits, So Far Away and Walk of Life, which both play in the girls' dormitory as Tish and Catherine bond. Over in the boys' dorm, Max has stolen Jinx and is hiding him in a closet. His fellow space campers make fun of Max and manage to break Jinx, and while they are clearly a big bunch of jerks, I can't help but think that NASA should keep better track of their billion-dollar robots so that 12-year-old kids can't walk off with them. One of the space campers who menaces Max is played by Scott Coffey, whom we've seen in both Some Kind of Wonderful and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Max manages to repair Jinx and wins Jinx's eternal loyalty. SpaceCamp classes begin. Andy is especially tough on Catherine, and Catherine, who is used to being exceptional at everything she tries, becomes frustrated when she isn't naturally adept at piloting a simulated space shuttle. Kevin talks Catherine into sneaking out with him past curfew so they can look at the space shuttle Atlantis on the launch pad. A bitter and jaded Kevin admits to Catherine that he sees no point in the space program because we're all going to get nuked anyway. Kevin is a tool, but he's expressing an amazingly prevalent Gen X belief. If there's one single driving factor that fueled Gen X cynicism, it was our collective belief that we were all going to die in a nuclear war before reaching adulthood, and thus there was no point in looking to the future. Just as they start making out, Catherine and Kevin get busted by Andy and Zach. Back at the boys' dormitory, an enraged Kevin blames Max for getting caught. Max bursts into tears and runs away. Max says out loud that he wishes he were in space. Jinx overhears him and decides to help Max's dream come true. Jinx communicates with NASA's computer system to find a way to send Max into space. During training the next day, the team continues to be a disaster. Nobody except Catherine knows what they're doing, and overachieving Catherine keeps trying to do everyone else's job. Despite their near-farcical levels of incompetence, the team, under Andy's supervision, is selected to sit inside the Atlantis while it undergoes a routine pre-launch engine check. One of the mission control operators is played by Terry O'Quinn, best known as John Locke on Lost. Jinx orders NASA's computer to ignite one of Atlantis' boosters. Mission Control has no choice but to light the other booster to prevent a catastrophic failure, and the space shuttle launches. The shuttle wasn't flight ready, so only the short-range radio is enabled, which means the kids immediately lose contact with Mission Control. Of greater concern is that the shuttle only has a single oxygen tank, which won't last long enough for them to reach the nearest re-entry window. However, there's a space station named Daedalus under construction nearby. It has a supply of oxygen tanks, so they adjust Atlantis' orbit to intercept. Even though they're out of radio contact, Tish sends messages in Morse code to Mission Control to tell them about their plan, but they go unreceived. Andy heads over to Daedalus on a spacewalk. She's too big to reach the oxygen tanks, so they send wee little Max into the abyss to fetch them. Faced with the inky void of space, Max has a pretty understandable freakout. Kevin pretends to be Obi-Wan Kenobi and counsels him to use the Force, which gives Max the courage to face his fears. Rudy walks Andy through the procedure to connect the oxygen to the shuttle, despite Catherine's best attempts to micromanage the situation. Catherine's confidence is shaken at the realization she would have doomed them all had Andy followed her advice instead of Rudy's. While trying to connect a second oxygen tank, Andy gets knocked unconscious and drifts into space. Not realizing Andy is not on board, Mission Control tries to close the cargo bay doors automatically in preparation for bringing the shuttle to reach its re-entry window. Catherine freezes at the controls, unable to decide whether to rescue Andy or reach their window. Kevin steps in and overrides Mission Control to open the cargo bay doors and rescue Andy. Catherine kicks herself for not being able to make decisions under pressure, and Kevin comforts her. Rudy proposes an alternate landing at the spaceport near White Sands, New Mexico. At Mission Control, Jinx realizes Tish has been sending repeated messages in Morse code and notifies NASA about the change in landing plan. Working together with NASA, the members of the shuttle crew land safely in New Mexico. SpaceCamp boasts a great setting and a great hook, teenagers in space, and it features a whole bunch of appealing actors. That's really all it has going for it, but that could have been enough. The story does the barest minimum to entertain viewers, but in some parallel universe where the Space Shuttle Challenger hadn't broken apart shortly after launch on January 28, 1986, SpaceCamp probably would have been a modest hit. The film looks pretty slick, the actors are cute, and the story is moderately gripping. There's something inherently inspiring about films centering around the space program, and SpaceCamp was content to coast on that. It doesn't try very hard to be a good film because it was made during a period of optimism where it assumed being mediocre would be enough to sell tickets. NASA's Space Shuttle program kicked off in 1981, and it captured the imagination of a lot of us Gen Xers because it seemed like a very accessible way to get to space. The shuttles had an outer appearance that resembled an airplane, and indeed landed like a plane, and each shuttle could be used again and again and again. As kids and young adults, a lot of us were crazy about the space shuttle. As soon as I mentioned I was tackling SpaceCamp, my sister trotted out a bizarrely well-researched paper she'd written in 1981 when she was 10, for which she'd written to NASA requesting research materials and had included her own lovingly hand-drawn diagrams. My sister is 50 now, and she has held on to this paper, for which she received an A+. With the constant threat of nuclear annihilation, there may not have been a whole lot for young Gen Xers to feel optimistic about in the early 80s, but the space program was one big reason to feel hopeful for the future. And that optimism vanished with the Challenger explosion. If you're a Gen Xer from the US, you probably remember where you were on January 28, 1986, and you were probably at school watching that explosion over and over and over again on closed-circuit television. By that point, SpaceCamp was already filmed and edited and all set for a summer release. In hindsight, it might have been better to shelve it for a year or two, but whenever SpaceCamp was released, it would have been impossible for viewers to separate it from the Challenger disaster. And that's not the film's fault, of course, but coming out in the wake of this national tragedy, the mediocrity of SpaceCamp seemed more pronounced. It's a film without memorable characters, or gripping action sequences, or surprising story developments. It's certainly watchable, and it's even kind of fun, but it's a very lazy film. And yet, despite its flaws, it's impossible to entirely dismiss SpaceCamp, because at least it accomplishes one big goal. Lea Thompson has mentioned in interviews that she hears from people all the time who are inspired to go to the real-life SpaceCamp after watching the film. I have no doubt that's true, because even though the script makes the barest minimum effort to entertain viewers, it still manages to make US SpaceCamp seem pretty cool. Next time, I was always certain the first Helen Slater film I'd tackle here would be Supergirl, but nope, I'm going with The Legend of Billie Jean. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and please enjoy your week.